inflation is still too high for the Federal Reserve, and so they are probably going to do another rate hike later this month after pausing last month. So they definitely do not want to declare victory yet because we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go yet to get to a more normal level of inflation that we saw before the pandemic hit.
Courtney Brown is one of the authors of Axios Macro and Economics Reporter for us. Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, Nyla.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is taking his presidential campaign on an Iowa blitz months before the GOP caucuses there. What's the goal of this strategy? Here's Axios congressional reporter Sophia Kai.
Iowa is really important for both DeSantis and Trump because it's the first caucus. And if Trump wins by a landslide, then he can cement this narrative that he's the overwhelming frontrunner. He can start thinking about the general election. But if DeSantis wins, or if even DeSantis comes in a close second and outperforms the expectations there, then that disrupts this narrative. That gives DeSantis and other GOP candidates a chance. DeSantis has been spending a lot of money, and yet his numbers are still sagging. He's been crisscrossing the state with his wife, Casey, who's targeting conservative women, and he's busy fundraising for members of Congress from Iowa, as well as the Attorney General of Iowa. His political action committee has about 200 people on the ground knocking on doors, getting people to commit to caucusing. You know, that's a lot of groundwork. Trump also has a pretty robust Iowa ground operation, but he's sitting out this weekend, and he's also sitting out Congresswoman Ashley Hinson's barbecue, and he's previously canceled an event. And that strategy of mostly sticking to events where he's the only speaker, it could be smart, but it also risks being seen as not hustling or not caring, and that may be a problem in a state where voters are used to having a lot of face time with presidential candidates. Remember, we're still 6 months away, so a lot could change between now and when the first votes are cast.
That's Axios political reporter Sophia Kai. In a moment, a migration spike shows up in politics across the world.
While many see clouds gathering around the state of retirement in America, Apollo and Athene see solutions. Let's rethink retirement. Find out more at l.apollo.com/retire. Investing tomorrow, today.
Welcome back to Axios Today. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Migration has spiked around the world. Last year, 2.9 million applications for asylum were submitted. That's more than any other year since at least 2000, according to UN data. And wealthy nations are struggling with the influx. Axios' Steph Kite reports that migrants are also increasingly willing to take dangerous, unauthorized passages to Europe and the U.S., which is fueling anti-immigrant politics. She's here now with the big picture. Hi, Steph.
Hi, Nyla.
Steph, can you explain why we're seeing this boom in migration globally right now?
Whenever you are dealing with migration trends like this, there are always multiple reasons for this. One is that there are a lot of crises that are going on around the world right now. You even just look at the impact we've seen post-COVID with the Afghanistan fall to the Taliban and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's a record number of forcibly displaced people in the world right now, according to UN statistics. In addition to that, global economic disparity is worsening, and so of course you're going to have people who are wanting to flee poor economic conditions and head toward countries that have more stable economies and potentially more jobs. So those are kind of some of the push factors that are forcing people to leave.
And so for the people who are wanting to head to places that are more stable or wealthier, how are countries like Australia, the Netherlands, and the UK dealing with this?
I mean, we've certainly seen a political backlash to some of these trends in migration. Just kind of looking at some of the recent actions taken by politicians. I mean, even the Netherlands recently, they had, a kind of collapse of their government over the weekend over disagreements around whether to limit the number of refugees or asylum seekers they admit. The far-right party in Germany has recently won a local government position, which was a really big deal, and that party often touts anti-immigrant policies. And we've also seen the growth of Stop the Boats movements in Australia and the UK, which is of course referencing migrant boats that often are full of refugees and asylum seekers looking to start fresh.
Hundreds were killed, including many children, when a migrant boat capsized off the coast of Greece last month. There were more than 750 people likely on board that ship. How has that tragedy and others like it shaped the international conversation around migrants?
I think instances like that boat capsizing really have captured the world's attention, that this is increasingly a problem, and it goes to show as well how visual this movement is, the way that you can really see the desperation, you see the issue in front of you. When you look at the coverage of these ships or people at the border, it lends itself to kind of political discussions that tend to be emotional. Politicians love to play on people's emotions. And I think that is a big part of why we've seen the conversation go in the direction it's gone. One thing that's interesting to me about the way we've seen so many of these wealthier nations react to these migration trends is that in the long term, experts agree that many of these wealthy nations will need immigration more and more in order to continue their own economic growth because of falling birth rates, because of aging populations. But because of the way these refugees and asylum seekers are traveling to these borders in kind of chaotic and overwhelming ways, people are responding to the emotional moment, and we're seeing Republicans, in particular far-right politicians, take advantage of the current moment and pushing for more restrictive policies.
Steph Beck covers immigration for Axios' political team. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks, Nyla.
One final note. We'll be airing the next installment of our summer book series soon, and I'd love to know what you're reading. If you can record a voice memo of your recent or all-time favorite summer reads and text it to me at 202-918-4893, we may use it on the show. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning. I'd like to tell you about the Big Take podcast from Bloomberg News. Each weekday, they bring you one important story from their global newsroom, like how AI will upend your life, why China is targeting the U.S. dollar, and how Joe Biden plans to take on Donald Trump. Check out The Big Take, a daily podcast from Bloomberg, wherever you listen.
How can we get to a better working world soon? Apollo is helping finance solutions to some of the most complex challenges the world is facing. From providing customized capital solutions that drive innovation and job growth to supporting a more sustainable future. Apollo, investing in tomorrow today. Learn more at apollo.com.
LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Briscoe, and this is the next. Warnings and advisories are in effect in about a dozen states, including nearly all of California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas, and the entire states of Louisiana and Arkansas. President Biden says he believes NATO has never been stronger. Biden was speaking today in Helsinki alongside Finland's President Sauli Niinistö following this week's NATO summit in Lithuania. Finland joined the alliance little more than 3 months ago in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
I remember a conversation you and I had when you called to come to the White House to talk about being a member of NATO. And it took me about 3 seconds to say yes.
Sweden is expected to join NATO soon. At the NATO summit, the alliance signaled its intention to eventually invite Ukraine to become a member of NATO. This is NPR News from Washington.
Good morning. It is 8:32 and 76 degrees in Cincinnati and Dayton. This is 91.7 WVXU. I'm Tana Weingartner. Options for water and trail recreation are expanding in western Hamilton County, and you can weigh in. Great Parks of Hamilton County is taking public comment on planned expansions of canoeing and kayaking infrastructure along the Whitewater and Great Miami rivers. They're also looking for input on trail networks for biking and walking. There's an open house about the West Region Blueway and Trail System tonight from 4 to 7 at Whitewater Crossing Christian Church. You can also submit comments online through August 7th. You'll find details at wvxu.org. Ethanol producers and corn growers worry a federal rule on tailpipe emissions could leave them out of the transition to cleaner cars. That could have big implications for Indiana, one of the top ethanol producers in the country. The EPA has proposed a rule to cut emissions by more than half from its 2026 target. Proponents say the EPA didn't consider the role a number of other technologies could play, like hydrogen fuel cells, hybrids, or cars that can use gas with higher amounts of ethanol. John Graham is a professor at Indiana University. He says even small lithium-ion batteries in a hybrid engine can control a lot of emissions.
So if you put that in, say, 10 or 15 hybrids, you'll control as much greenhouse gas emissions as you have in just one all-electric vehicle. So there's a lot of batteries and raw materials going into each of these all-electric vehicles that's not being used very wisely.
Ethanol advocates say the EPA also didn't consider if there are enough critical minerals available to make those EVs or the emissions that could come from mining them. The Cincinnati Zoo's 20-year-old Komodo dragon, who reportedly had the personality of a golden retriever, has died. Hoodoo had been at the zoo since 2009. His grandfather was a gift from Indonesia's president, where Komodo dragons are considered a national treasure. Hoodoo's keepers say he was one of their favorites and called him a good boy. In 2020, he became the first Komodo dragon in the world to undergo double cataract surgery. You can see a picture of Hoodoo in his heyday and a tiny toddler Komodo dragon at WVXU.org.
If you love jazz, your smart speaker can now play jazz music 24 hours a day. Enable the Cincinnati Jazz skill and say, Alexa, open Cincinnati Jazz to begin listening.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Paycom, an HR and payroll tool designed to prevent lost hours during the week and maximize employee productivity. Learn more at paycom.com/radio. From Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at fisherinvestments.com. Investments in securities involve the risk of loss. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm A. Martinez in Culver City, California.
And I'm Steve Inskeep in Washington, D.C. Guatemala's presidential election is getting even more complicated.
Yeah, we've been talking about the Central American country, which is one of the sources of migration to the United States. The country held the first round of a presidential election surrounded by chaos. Last night, officials finalized the results of that first round, leaving two candidates for a runoff, but a court says one of the two candidates is disqualified. So what does that mean?
NPR's Ada Peralta joins us. Hey there, Ada.
Hey, Steve.
How did Guatemala get to this point?
The first round of elections was total chaos, as you guys mentioned. Courts disqualified three leading candidates in decisions that were widely viewed as political, and that they were seen as a ploy by the country's political elites to remain in power and assure that they would never be tried for corruption, as they had in the past. And a lot of Guatemalans had lost hope. They viewed most of nearly 24 candidates as corrupt, and they were sure that the political elite would get their way, that one of them would win. But the results, Steve, were stunning. Yes, Sandra Torres, a former First Lady who was at one point jailed on corruption charges, came in first. But second came Bernardo Arevalo, who's a reformist who ran on an anti-corruption campaign and who also happens to be the son of Guatemala's first democratically elected president. No one expected that, not even his party. But almost as soon as that happened, the political elite went into overdrive, trying to overturn the results. They banded together to pressure the courts, to pressure the Electoral Commission not to certify the votes.
So the effort to stop this reformist candidate seems to be a source of the chaos, but is it working for the elites?
I mean, remember how I told you that the courts had thrown out promising candidates before the first round of elections? Well, they're trying that again. Prosecutors accused Semilla, the party of the reformist candidate. They accused the party of fraud, and the court ordered electoral authorities to stop him from participating in politics. But then things got more complicated. Just after that court decision, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal certified the results of the first round and said that Bernardo Arevalo, the reformist, would indeed move on to the second round. Arevalo was on CNN in Español last night, and he said this was a done deal. Let's listen.
De ninguna manera vamos a obedecer una decisión espuria e ilegal como la que ha sido emitida.
He said they would not obey a spurious and illegal decision that came from a court known for making political decisions.
Nonetheless, it is a court. It's made its decision, so where does that leave us for the second round of the election?
That is the question that everyone in Guatemala is asking themselves. Electoral officials were asked if they would listen to the court, and they had no good answers. They said they didn't know if the court order held any sway, so the best answer I can give you is that this election is in limbo. But the bigger picture here is that over the last decade, Guatemala has suffered major blows to what used to be a promising democracy, and just a couple of months ago, there was very little hope that Guatemala's democracy could be saved. But this election has actually become a real test with huge stakes. It's an election that might very well mark the end of Guatemala's democracy, or it could give it another chance.
NPR's Ada Peralta, thanks so much.
SAG-AFTRA is Hollywood's biggest union. Their contract expired at midnight, and their negotiators are recommending they go on strike. Now, the SAG-AFTRA National Board will meet later this morning to vote on it. If the actors strike, they'll join the writers' union on the picket line in Sugar.
Interviews are just full of conspiracy theories, misleading and even outright false claims, and many of these are things he's been saying for years. So he has claimed that chemicals in the water supply could be turning children transgender. He claims Wi-Fi causes cancer and what he calls leaky brain. He's even suggested that AIDS may not be caused by HIV, and he's repeated his longest running false claim that vaccines cause autism. And of course, Mary Louise, there's no credible evidence for any of this, but listening to him, it all adds up to this very conspiratorial worldview, this idea that they, whether it's the government, pharmaceutical companies, the media, are lying to you, he's telling the truth.
When you say Kennedy has been embracing conspiracy theories for years, and we said he's been shunned for that by many circles for years, what is driving him to prominence today?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Those views really did sideline him from the mainstream for a long time, but then COVID happened, and the pandemic really gave an opening for Kennedy and other anti-vaccine activists to gain traction. Here's how Colina Koltai put it. She's a researcher who studies the anti-vax movement.
The global that I made vaccines and disease like the conversation, right? And everyone's online. It was able to propel, I think, Kennedy in a way that he would probably not have been able to if the pandemic never happened.
So during COVID, he was very critical about how the government handled the pandemic, and he aligned himself with many of these criticisms we heard from the political right, opposing mask and vaccine mandates and school and business closures. Kennedy also falsely claimed that COVID vaccines were unsafe and promoted debunked alternative treatments, and that ultimately was what led to him losing some of those social media accounts.
Oh, and did that losing social media accounts, did that actually end up getting him more attention?
Well, it did. I think it kind of gave him common cause, even more common cause with some of these figures on the right. So he's described being banned from social media as censorship. He accuses the Biden administration of playing a role in getting him deplatformed, and these are complaints we hear from conservatives. And this is what has set the tone for his presidential run, which is now giving him an even bigger platform than he had with COVID.
Well, I guess the central question here is this getting him anywhere with voters?
Right. Many of these views are very out of step with mainstream Democrats, especially vaccines, which Americans support largely across political parties. Now, the polls do show him gaining some support. Of course, he is still well behind President Biden. It's hard to know. It's very early, right? It's interesting, as he's campaigning, to the degree that he's doing in-person campaigning, he's appeared at many libertarian, even conservative events. Those are not the places you would expect to reach Democrats. Our colleagues at New Hampshire Public Radio reported there's not much of a ground campaign in New Hampshire, which is traditionally the first primary. Where Kennedy does have support is among his fellow anti-vaccine activists and anti-establishment types. He's also been embraced by wealthy tech executives, including Elon Musk and Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, and some venture capitalists who see Kennedy as a contrarian free thinker. He also has the support of Trump allies Steve Bannon and Roger Stephan. They've encouraged this challenge to Biden. So, Mary Louise, even as a long shot candidate, Kennedy's views are out there. They're getting attention, which is exactly what he wants.
And Pierre Sean in Bond, thank you.
Thanks so much.
The United Nations Security Council is expected to vote tomorrow to extend the UN's work in Haiti. But the council has yet to decide whether to send international troops. Gangs have taken over much of the country, and the UN's been warning for months that the country is on the brink. NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
Maria Isabel Salvador has been the lead UN official on Haiti for just a few months. She knew this was going to be a tough assignment. Gangs control much of Haiti's capital, so she can't move around much. But she says coming from Ecuador, she understands the problems that plague Haiti.
I have some advantage in the sense that all the things that happen in Haiti happen in the rest of the continent and in my own country, in Ecuador. With one very important difference, is that, of course, the situation in Haiti is extreme. But the problems are the same.
Political problems, poverty, and insecurity. The UN Special Representative fears that Haiti is heading to, as she puts it, a point of no return, and she's urging the UN Security Council to approve an international force. She knows many Haitians were initially skeptical, given Haiti's long history of failed interventions.
But I can assure you that the great majority of Haitian people want this force because they know that the Haitian National Police will not be able to provide the security they need to have a normal, or more or less normal living.
But the UN has been talking about this since last fall, and no country has offered to lead such a force. Salvador was here in Washington to get an update on U.S. efforts.
Mainly the United States have been trying to find a country who would be ready to take the lead. And of course that is a requirement. If there's no country taking the lead, it is going to be very difficult to have this multilateral non-UN international force.
The U.S. tried to convince Canada or Brazil to take the lead and is now looking to countries in Africa and Asia. The other possibility is a formal UN peacekeeping force. Either way, it will require another Security Council resolution and another debate. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Washington.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Still ahead on WVXU, NPR's Mary Louise Kelly talks with a representative from New Jersey about controversy surrounding some conservative lawmakers pushing to amend policies from the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. The conversation is at 5:35 during All Things Considered on 91.7 WVXU and 88.5 WMUB.
WVXU goes wherever you do. Listen to 91.7 online at iHeartRadio.com and on websites through the iHeartRadio app.
Support comes from Cincinnati Opera presenting Madame Butterfly. For over a century, audiences have been moved to tears by this heart-wrenching tragedy. Now, see Puccini's classic opera come to life as a virtual fantasy at Music Hall, featuring the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. Tickets at cincinnatiopera.org. Madame Butterfly, July 22nd, 27th, and 29th.
91.7 WVXU invites you to join us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and now you can find Cincinnati Public Radio on TikTok and YouTube. We hope you'll follow or subscribe to all our platforms for some behind-the-scenes fun, upcoming event information, and links to our award-winning news coverage.
This traffic report is supported by Pilot Lumber. Northbound 75 after Sherman Road, there was a wreck, but it's been moved out of the way. Traffic is still slow back to Mitchell. Eastbound 275 between Kellogg and New Richmond, there's a wreck on the right shoulder. Northbound 75 on the ramp to the Western Hills Viaduct, there's a wreck there. Northbound 75 after Mitchell, a wreck on the right shoulder. Kennedy at Duck Creek, Reading at Section Road. Wolf Angle south of State Road, there's a wreck there. In the Dayton area, northbound 75 after Dixie Highway in Central, there's a wreck in the left and center lane. From 9 first warning weather, storms ending tonight with a low of 69 degrees, 89 for tomorrow, 74 degrees now.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from BritBox, with a variety of British mysteries available for streaming, including all seasons of Luther, Father Brown, and Silent Witness. Available during Mystery Month at BritBox.com/NPR. From Indeed, designed to be an end-to-end hiring solution for businesses of any size to attract, interview, and hire candidates all from one place. More at Indeed.com/NPR. And from the listeners who support this NPR station.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Adrian Florillo. Time now for some science news from our friends at NPR's Shortwave podcast. Regina Barber and Jeff Brumfield are here now for our Science Roundup. Hey, you two.
Hello.
Hey.
Okay, so as usual, you have brought us 3 stories this week of science in the news. So give us a tease.
So we've got a story about 500 million-year-old sea skirt that might have us rethink when vertebrates came about.
A way to use mosquitoes to fight malaria, and a Copper Age Spanish leader.
Okay, so Regina, you go first. Researchers have been studying a fossil, something you call a sea skirt.
Yeah. So recently, researchers at Harvard published a paper in Nature Communications detailing a newly identified, super old, very well-preserved species of sea skirt. And if you're like me, you're wondering, what is a sea skirt?
Yes, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, they're a type of small tube-shaped creature, and they're part of a category of animals called tunicates.
Tunicates, obviously, you know this, Adrian, but just for our audience, are very cool. They have this precursor spinal cord, and they're the closest invertebrate relative that we vertebrates have.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been around for 500 million years, but because they're squishy and soft, it's hard to find fossils. It's hard to find fossils of them, which means there's almost no traces of it in the fossil record. But recently, they found this thing hiding out in the collections vault of the Natural History Museum of Utah in Salt Lake City. I spoke to one of the paleontologists on the paper, Carmen Nanglo. He says that this fossil is
essentially the only tunicate in the fossil record that can tell us anything about their early evolution.
So this thing is 500 million years old? What does it tell us there?
Yeah, so like Jeff said, tunicates and humans share a common ancestor. So this fossil can tell us maybe what that common ancestor looked like, but also tells us that it might be older than we thought.
But then I wonder, do we humans still have anything in common with a sea skirt?
Yeah, we do actually. The soft tissues in modern-day sea skirts share some gene regulatory pathways with muscles in your heart. So the heart beating in your chest right now is genetically linked, in a distant way, to this creature from 500 million years ago. And what's even more exciting is Carmen Nanglu says that there could be other fossils like this one already in museums, sitting in cabinets waiting to be found, and they're really like striking gold.
There's definitely gold inside there, and we have a prospect for kind of like gold to open some of that. Maybe that's also exciting. And then sometimes we get a story like this.
I can almost imagine the TV show, the sea skirt hunters. All right, first story. Let's talk about mosquitoes and the diseases that they help spread. Specifically malaria. Jeff, I understand there's new research that might one day make mosquitoes less prone to carrying that disease.
That's right. Researchers have managed to genetically engineer mosquitoes to produce their own malaria-fighting antibodies. So, just to remind everyone, malaria is caused by a parasite. The parasite grows in humans, gets into the blood, and makes us really sick, and then mosquitoes carry the parasites from person to person. But it doesn't make the mosquitoes ill.
Okay, wait, let me just be clear. The mosquitoes carry all these malaria parasites, but because they don't get sick from that parasite, their immune systems don't bother to fight it.
Until now, that's right. These researchers figured out a way to genetically modify the mosquitoes so that they naturally produced antibodies that fought the malaria parasite. They used technology called CRISPR that lets scientists precisely edit the genetic code of animals. Basically, it puts the insects on the front lines of this disease.
Okay, so Jeff, I'm going to stop you right there, because genetically modifying wild animals can be controversial.
Yeah, in this case, it is absolutely controversial. In fact, our colleague Rob Stein has reported on some other scientists who are working on ways to wipe out mosquitoes altogether, which has really stirred things up. Now, arguably, a good thing about this paper is it doesn't use that sort of gene editing technology to try and wipe mosquitoes out. Instead, it sort of turns them into allies against malaria. Of course, that also means there's a bunch of genetically modified insects flying around, and environmentalists say the risks of spreading these genes through mosquito populations far outweigh the benefits, especially when there are other technologies that can control malaria.
And aside from being sort of potentially hugely controversial, I mean, there's just the question of does this work?
Well, Anthony James of the University of California, Irvine led this study, and he says these mosquito antibodies do the job pretty well.
They work very well. They reduce the number of parasites in the mosquito, importantly in the salivary glands, which is where they would be before they're transmitted to a new horse.
According to this paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they believe that they could reduce malaria by 50 to 90% in some scenarios. But of course, this is still in the early stages. There's a long way to go in terms of regulation and just testing.
Okay, well, for our final story, we have a surprise from the world of archaeology, and I understand it's from a site, Jeff, in southwest Spain.
Yes, so this goes back to a discovery in 2008. An international team of researchers have reevaluated the remains of a person who was a ruler in the Copper Age.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the Copper Age, we're talking about nearly 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, scientists used to think those remains belonged to a man, but now these researchers think it's more likely they belonged to a woman. They published their findings recently in the journal Scientific Reports.
And who was this person? Some kind of royal?
Well, probably not a king or queen. This was a time before they existed in the world. The researchers think this person was more like a social leader. They were originally nicknamed the Ivory Man because of all the ivory objects found around the burial site, but now they are calling her the Ivory Lady.
That seems like a pretty dramatic find. Why did it take 15 years to reach this conclusion?
Well, it comes down to the technique the researchers had available. Archaeologists usually determine a skeleton sex by looking at the pelvis and the skull, or by looking at DNA. But when remains are this old, a lot of things get broken down. One thing that does tend to stick around are teeth.
And that's because tooth enamel is actually the hardest part of the human body.
So it turns out there's a small protein in tooth enamel that has two different versions. One if you have an X chromosome and one if you have a Y. So if someone is chromosomally female, they'll only have the X version of the protein, not the Y.
And so I'm guessing that the researchers only saw the X version of this protein in the teeth of these remains and therefore think that it was a female?
Yeah, most likely. They didn't see